I have been, to be honest, not really keeping up on my reading because suddenly I found myself with the abundance of topics that I'm interested in. So I kept on going down a bunch of different rabbit holes, but not deep enough to actually make meaningful progress in the readings of it. I'm just like, oh, maybe I should do this. Oh, maybe I should look at that, and then so that has significantly hindered my ability to read something to completion, which is the type of reading that I like to do. But today, happy to report that I finished the latest book I was reading. I've been on this book for I think how many months? Like 5, 6 months. But this is a Korean book, so the English-speaking audience will probably not get to read it. But it is called "The Stories Around the Flower Garland Sutra." To explain why I got into this book in the first place is because I have a review of the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra in my YouTube channel. So when at the time I was really just passionately in love with reading the sutras, right? Especially many people consider the Diamond Sutra to be the magnum opus of Mahayana Buddhism, but for me personally, the Heart Sutra was the one text that made everything click. I felt so once I integrated and fully understood the Heart Sutra, my world just completely flipped around, and I still remember that day in meditation when this just like clicked for me, and so the both of those sutras are fairly concise. They're not that long, and especially the Heart Sutra is very concise. So I was like, whoa, if I just read two of the many Mahayana sutras, and I wonder what else is there, right? And then so I looked, and then there are other sutras, but the most prominent one, especially around the East Asian Buddhism culture, is the Flower Garland Sutra and the Lotus Flower Sutra. So the Lotus Sutra I will get to read after the readings that I have queued up, but I got interested in the Flower Garland Sutra because simply because it was just presented to me first randomly, right? And I had this book ordered from Korea, and I was waiting for it. While I was waiting for it to arrive, I was trying to tackle some other Buddhist texts. So that's why I read the Awakening of Faith, which is another book that I reviewed. And Awakening of Faith was really difficult to read, and in fact, the book called the Book of Awakening of Belief was in fact my distraction, because my primary goal was to read another sutra called the Lankavatara Sutra, and I was trying to read the Lankavatara Sutra, and I was like, wow, I have no fucking idea what the fuck is happening. And I needed something a little bit simpler. So I looked at the book of Awakening of Faith, and it's not that big, right? Oh, so okay. So this must be sort of an easier read compared to the Lankavatara Sutra, which turned out to be not the case at all. But Awakening of Faith was a very concise and yet very, very packed book. It was really it took a serious study for me to actually complete it. But I'm so glad I took that excursion first before I started reading this book. Because the Flower Garland Sutra also talks a lot about the abstract concepts that are discussed very much in detail in the Awakening of Faith. So, I think this is my way of, the Buddha is looking out for me, right? Basically, he's making it easy for me to learn. But who knows? Maybe I could have read the Flower Garland Sutra stories first, and then I would have read the Awakening of Faith, and then I could have had a more comprehensive view of the Flower Garland Sutra, or whatever. But anyway, in terms of the meaning of the Flower Garland Sutra, what is it? And the the Heart Sutra is about the void, right? The sunyata, or the inherentness not existing. So Heart Sutra is about that. Diamond Sutra is particularly focused on the idea of images and illusions. So while those two have specific topics that the sutra warps itself around, Flower Garland Sutra is actually really, really abstract. And why this book is the stories around the Flower Garland Sutra and not the Flower Garland Sutra is because the Flower Garland Sutra is actually 60 volumes, 80 volumes, depending on like the publication. And this sutra was really expansive, very large, and Chinese earlier scholars spent a lot of time trying to decipher this really lengthy Indian book containing the Flower Garland Sutra, and it is known to have only 3 like physical copies, and that's how precious and rare it was, and also that's how difficult it is to access all the volumes. So to read the Flower Garland Sutra in its entirety, you probably need to tackle it in the way you would if you were a PhD student studying professionally like Buddhism, right? But unfortunately, I am a lay believer, and I'm just trying my best to understand the sutra, what it's saying, so that I can apply it to my life as a proper Buddhist. So that's why this book is a little bit easy to read, because it is actually a non-fictional book that describes the stories around the Flower Garland Sutra. So this book introduces many anecdotes about each chapter of the Flower Garland Sutra. And it starts by the stories around how this book was first initially discovered and how the historians have backtraced it. And so looking at the Chinese and the Indian subcontinent geography, it takes a lot of assumptions and speculations around how the book may have arrived at certain places. And the cultural impact that this book has is also explained in greater depth. Every sutra centers around one individual, and so the Heart Sutra is focused on Avalokiteshvara because he's the one who first has the Great Awakening, and he talks to Sariputra. And the Diamond Sutra is about the Buddha that we know, Shakyamuni, and Buddha is talking to Subodhi, and Subodhi is the one who is engaging with the Buddha in this discourse about, oh, great one, in order for us to be really great too, like you. Like, how should they, surrender their heart? And then the Buddha replies, and the Diamond Sutra is that conversation. The key prominent figure in this particular sutra is a different Buddha, not the Buddha that we know. It's Vairochana. Vairochana is the Buddha who is usually making this gesture. So you note that in Buddhist art, Buddha has lots of different postures. One is like this, and then one is gently pointing to the sky, and one is gently pointing to the ground, and another, it may be like meditating like this, and basically there's all these different poses. But and Avalokiteshvara has like 10,000 hands, but Vairochana is symbolized with this. Like you wrap your one index finger around your with your other fist. And so this is basically saying, this body gesture is saying one is whole and whole is one. And Vairochana is basically the conceptual embodiment of the eternal truth itself. And the eternal truth itself has no form, right? It's very abstract. But in order for the eternal truth's graciousness to help us understand it, it takes a personalized form. And that is basically Vairochana meditating in this posture. So, it explains many temples that were influenced by the Flower Garland Sutra, and so all these temples have a figure of Vairocana, and then other surrounding Buddhas and other Bodhisattvas around. And so the book also talks a lot about Buddhism art because this sutra has influenced a lot of different arts. And also, it also talks a lot about how these temples and how these statues and how these sculptures were lost. Why were they lost? Because of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I learned about this very recently too, but post World War II, when Mao Zedong was in office and in power, China had this really big moment of national vandalism, basically self-inflicted vandalism that kind of destroyed all the cultural legacies that China had. China has a long history, right? But during that period, the Cultural Revolution is basically just annihilating all the Chinese influences and great arts by themselves. No one else did it. It's not like there was a war, and it's not like people have, started some shit and then blah blah blah. It's not because of an religious conflict. It's purely contained within China. And so this was the great tragedy of basically like human beings as well, but also the culturally and religiously a lot of artifacts of significance were lost in time because of this. With every book review, I like to also talk about my favorite passages. And this book doesn't really have a particular passage that I like, but there was a lot of repetition around one kind of there was a pattern that kept on repeating. So, all the monks and the lay followers that are featured in this book basically have a very devoted relationship with this sutra. So many people across time have chosen this particular sutra as their primary home base, right? So if you ask me, what sutra do I base all of my awakening knowledge on? And I would still tell you it's the Heart Sutra, because that's how much the Heart Sutra means to me, because it allowed me to have the first taste of the enlightenment. But this book talks at length about all the different people who devoted their life with the Flower Garland Sutra. But, as I have mentioned in length, Flower Garland Sutra is not this easy read. So, I memorize and I recite the Heart Sutra, especially around when meditation, like my legs are falling asleep and everything hurts. I try to recollect myself by reciting and thinking about each individual line of the Heart Sutra. So basically, in this book, there are many anecdotes of followers who did that with this sutra. So like 60, 80 volumes of sutra they memorize, and they spend their entire meditation reciting it. And they devote their lives to studying this and also teaching it to other people. And so in the hardcore pursuit of the memorization of this grand sutra and the internalization of it, there are many stories around how the monks have shown commitment. So one monk was doing a walking meditation while reciting. And so because it was so long, the feet started bleeding. And then it was later said that the bones were protruding out because the foot was basically a goner. But that wouldn't stop the devotion to this. And later on, when the feet gave out, he walked on his knees to complete the recitation, right? And also there's stories around constant meditation and the constant surrender of the body to natural forces. So in one passage, one anecdote, there's a story about a man who was meditating so much that in his entire life, mosquitoes and flies, that they fed on his flesh. But then after a certain point in time, right, it just stopped. And this, I say some point of time as if it's like 3 years or whatever, but it's like 40, 60 years. and then it's basically showing even the bugs understood that this is like a holy thing and not to consume, and things, stories like that. Other stories feature how in pursuit of this, people have gladly burned off their fingers in demonstration of their devotion to this. And I was like, wow, that's fucking hardcore. Is this like legit? Do people actually do that? And then I searched. Well, at first it was a term I didn't understand. It's called 소지 공양 in Korean. So I was like, what is 소지 공양? And then I googled it and it's like, oh, it's like burning of your hand. And then I saw some pictures of monks who actually went through this practice, right? So they're holding their finger like something like this, right? And basically these digits they burned off in order to, show their devotion. But, they're living fine and they're really happy with the knowledge that they have and the integration of the awakening that they have. And they are part of this grand story of how this really, really, really giant sutra keeps on spreading itself over millennia and over a lot of time, right? And what makes this possible? What makes this kind of devotion possible? It's the grand truth, the grand universal truth that is static and yet all the time at the same time changing, that has form that also doesn't have form. See, Buddhism has a lot of paradoxes. And also this book, this sutra is where the Buddhism concepts around numbers got really evolved too. So basically, like Buddha is saying, somebody is saying, oh, great one, how do we how great is the act of cleaning your act and meditating in peace and doing good into the world. Then the reply goes something like this, like, suppose you have a grain of sand, and then for every time you walk the entire earth you drop one grain of sand. And basically imagine that whole grain of sand forming enough of a sand to fill an entire beach, and that entire beach is one grain that is held by a bigger hand. And so very recursive, like, right? And then it says when all of those sands are expended and exhausted, even that much of a greatness is nothing compared to the good deed and the good heart of the clean soul. And so in order to explain the grand good of the following the Eightfold Path and engaging in your mind in a clean way, not harming other people, benefiting other people, helping other people come into the awakening and spreading the Dharma, the goodwill that comes from those acts is greater than these abstract crazy number system. And so this sutra, I think, is very difficult to understand, and to be honest, I haven't really read it, right? All I read was all these anecdotes about particular passages, and the author goes into explaining parts of that passage and why it's relevant to the Buddhism discourse. And so this sutra is a big mountain, but it is a mountain that can be climbed nevertheless, and it is a mountain that is worth climbing, I think. So after I'm done with all the readings that I want to, maybe I will try and try to tackle the entire sutra. It's in Korean. It's called 한 권으로 읽는 화엄경 이야기, and when I translate it, it is the Flower Garland Sutra stories in one volume of a book. And it's actually written originally by a Japanese researcher, Kamata Shigeo, and it was translated into Korean by a translator called Jang Hui-ok. And again, I'm not sure if this book will ever be available in English, but this was my latest read. And after this one, I have a fictional book to read. My friend Margaret Chatwin released her latest book, and it's sitting in my bookshelf, and I'm excited to devour into that now. Alright, that's the video for today. See you in the next video.